every time we have an encounter with Jesus, what's one thing that we learn about Jesus? What's one thing we see about Jesus that we didn't see before? And just as importantly, what's one thing we learn and see about ourselves and who we can be with Jesus? And so we're not really after just kind of accumulating a bunch of head knowledge around this thing. We're really about just saying, look, again, how do we walk in a life-giving relationship with Jesus? And we do that in a life of encounters with Jesus. We just live, we're trying to live in step with him all along the way. And so really glad you're here to kind of engage in that today. You ever been in trouble for something that you did, but what you did wasn't actually wrong? I think you have, because we've all been children at once, right? And some of you are kids in the room and everywhere else. So you ever tried to explain to your parents, wait, that's not actually what happened, but you just don't win, right? Kids, you never win that argument or that debate. And I used to hate that, and now as a parent, I love that, okay? But when you're the parent, you win that argument, okay? But sometimes you do the right thing and you still get in trouble. You can even do the morally right thing and find yourself in really weird circumstances sometimes, yeah? And you kind of look around and think, how did this happen? How did I get here? I mean, I did this and now, okay? I mean, it just happens sometimes in life. Today, I want to invite you to jump into Acts chapter 16 in your Bible, whether you're going to scroll on a device or whether you're going to actually flip the pages of a bound Bible. If you don't have a Bible and you're in the room and love to have one, we just love to give you, there's one of these next to exit doors, or you can stop by the hub and we'll give you a Bible there too, which is a little different than this one, but Acts chapter 16, here's what we're going to find. We're going to jump in the middle of a story, so let me set the equation for you. There's two guys traveling around, and they're really telling new communities about the person of Jesus. They're moving place to place. They're really telling a lot of non-Jewish people about Jesus because that's where they sense the Lord kind of called them. There were some of the other early followers who were telling the Jewish people about Jesus. And Paul and Silas, they're going to the non-Jewish people, or what we call Gentiles. What was funny is everywhere they would go, a bunch of Jewish people would get upset because Paul and Silas are talking about a Jesus that you can follow without a lot of religion, without a lot of formula. Okay, they're trying to build intimacy of relationship where Jesus really is our King and he really is our Lord and our leader. But they're taking out a lot of the other stuff has been removed because of Jesus. Well, the Jewish people are really troubled by that. So every place Paul and Silas go to talk about Jesus, they find themselves getting in all sorts of trouble, right? I mean, it's like, man, we're just talking about Jesus, and everything we do, we get ourselves in some big hot mess, right? It's just like, how does this keep happening? But they know it, they understand it, they even predict it, they even know it's coming in most places, right? So they get to this one town, and there's some people there who, for lack of a better description, they're making money through some very dark practices. They're using darkness and evil to make money. And inside of that darkness and evil, they're even really kind of abusing and taking advantage of some people, at least one person that we would encounter in the story. And that's happening, and they're kind of pestering Paul and Silas. And eventually Paul and Silas have had enough. And so they reach out, and in the strength of Jesus, they put a stop to that. They just say, look, we're done with this, and they put a stop to it. They call the darkness what it is, and the light wins the day. Well, that becomes a problem because that was these people's money-making way. They didn't really care if they made money in a moral way or immoral way or in a righteous way or in an evil way. They just wanted to make their money. And so when their money gets messed with, that becomes a problem, which is really interesting because that's true for most of us too, right? A lot of times we talk about around money or around giving, and we're like, hey, when we talk about fear and everything else, and it is fear, but at the end of the day, it's about control. We want to be able to have some control over it. So the same thing happens. Paul and Silas, they push against the evil. That impacts some people's business and their economy, the evil way, even the abusive way in which they were making money. And so those people start going around and they start rallying. They're drawing sides, man. It's like, okay, this is it. We're going to get a bunch of people against you, and we're just going to get more people than you and stronger people than you. And we're basically going to have a little community brawl here, okay? And Paul and Silas are like, man, we didn't even do anything wrong. We're talking about Jesus, okay? We're not forcing anybody to do anything, but we are talking about Jesus. And really, we called out evil. Your own people are being abused by this darkness. And then watch what happens. We're going to start reading Acts Chapter 16, we're going to start in verse 22. I love this. It says, the crowd joined in the attack, okay? So the momentum is growing. If it's Paul and Silas staring down 5 people, then it's 10 people. A half hour later, it's 50 people. An hour later, it's 200 people, right? The crowd against them is growing, okay? The crowd joined in the attack against Paul and Silas, and the magistrates ordered them to be stripped and beaten with rods. Because they hadn't really done anything wrong, but they had definitely pushed against a cultural norm. They had talked about Jesus. And these weren't just like token beatings to like say, okay, we tried to do something. Listen to the next line. After they had been severely flogged. We're talking now about significant damage to the body. Lots of cuts, lots of tears, lots of open flesh and wounds. After that, they were thrown into prison, and the jailer was commanded to guard them carefully. For the jailer, like this is a make or break deal for the jailer because you're in charge of the prisoner and you've risen to this level of responsibility and you definitely don't want to fail. So he's going to take extra caution because this is his livelihood, right? This is what his job calls for. So when he received these orders in verse 24, he put them in the inner cell and fastened their feet in stocks, which really is this picture of them being placed in agonizing positions to put their feet in the stocks. So they happen to be talking about Jesus. They happen to be pushing against darkness and actually freeing a couple people from darkness and abuse. And the result of that is they get ganged up on by the town. They get beaten. They get flogged. They get thrown in jail. And if they're not in enough pain, they get their feet fastened in agonizing stocks. Isn't it funny just how sometimes you can do the right thing and be in an environment, in a circumstance where you think, what in the world just happened to me? What in the world just happened to me? It's unbelievable to me. Look at verse 25. About midnight, Paul and Silas, sitting with their wounds and with their feet in these stocks, were praying and singing hymns to God. And the other prisoners were listening. I don't mean to, it's not funny, but it is funny. I'm just so convinced that's not my first response if that's me. You might be way more holy than me. Like you might be, that's the first thing I'm doing. Bloodied, beaten, ripped apart back and my feet in weird positions and not sure really why I'm in here. First thing I'm doing is busting out the hymnal. I mean, maybe that's you. I'm just not sure. I want to say it's me, but I'm honestly just not sure. I'm just not sure. I mean, honestly, just ask yourself honestly, is it you? I mean, would that be your first move? Would that be your first response? I actually think we're living in a little bit of a litmus test. I think we can just ask, what have we done the last 14 months? And it would give us a little bit of a window. Man, that might be too close to home, but what have we done the last 14 months? Have we grumbled, complained, slandered, belittled, abused, bullied, lived in fear? Or have we said the mission of Jesus, the person of Jesus, the fame of Jesus, the strength of Jesus is what I trust in and live for most? And so my first response will be to worship him, to make much of him, to lean on him. When I haven't really done anything wrong, and yet I find myself in this environment, right? I think it's fascinating. They start singing, and by default, the people around them hear, right? So they're singing loud enough. They're not whispering their hymns. They're letting it rip, okay? Injured people letting it rip. You can try and determine what beauty that sounded like, right? They're just letting it happen, right? You see, here's the thing about encountering God. Here's the thing about you and I having an encounter with God and ongoing encounters with God, and that God encounters often include our decided worship in our agony. Our Our God encounters often include our worship in our agony or in our disappointment or in our rejection or in our insecurity or in our loss. Our God encounters would certainly include our worship in the times of greatest momentum. But it also includes our time of greatest agony. And see, here's the thing, a couple things happen when we become people of worship in these environments. And one really is, worship is part of a spiritual warfare dynamic, right? Light and pushing against darkness. And so when we worship, and Paul and Silas worship in this moment, it is changing something around them, right? It is pushing against what's pushing against them, right? It is part of our acknowledgement that no matter what is pushing against me, I have a God that is bigger than that. I have a God whose promises are still yes and amen. I have a God who is still not going to let anything separate me from his love. It is that. But the other thing that worship does is worship opens our own awareness to the God who's already present. And when we become aware of the God that's already present, we become more open to what God might want to do. When we worship, we become more aware of God's presence. And when we become more aware of God's presence, we get a little more open to what God might want to do. Listen, so hear me on this. So many times, we wait to be people of worship until something aligns. We act like worship is a response to something God did. Worship is actually a response to who God is. Worship is a response to God's presence. Worship is a response to just who God is the God who is with us, right? And then that launches our awareness to say, wait, what might God do in this moment? Listen, worship isn't about awakening God. Worship's about awakening us to the God who's already there. So I want to say to some of you, man, just let it go. Let it happen. Let yourself be a person of worship. And am I talking about, when we gather and we sing on a Sunday? Yes. But that's like the smallest part of it. We worship Jesus with our whole life. We worship Jesus 7 days a week. We worship Jesus with our obedience and with our trust, with our ongoing conversation with him. And we worship Jesus collectively, certainly in these moments that we spend together on a Sunday, and it is significant. And I say, man, be a person of worship before you're a person that feels something. Be a person of worship by choice, even when you're in your agony or disappointment or rejection or insecurity or loss. Because it awakens us to the fact that God is still with us. And when we become awakened to the fact that God is still with us, we become aware or more open to what God might want to do. Our God encounters include our worship in our agony, in our frustration, in our anger. Paul and Silas, they're modeling this for us. They're leading the way in this. Even when we're in spots where we're like, how in the world did I get here? Then look at what happens. This is where it gets kind of fun and exciting. Suddenly there was such a violent earthquake that the foundations of the prison were shaken. That's kind of cool, right? It's kind of fun. You ever been in a room that was shaken like that? It's just like, this is great, right? Why? I don't necessarily know if it's just because they were worshiping, shifting things. I think it includes because they were worshiping and they were becoming open to what God might do. They become open to God doing the thing they had never maybe seen before. Maybe they'd only heard stories about. There was this earthquake and the foundations of the prison were shaken, and at once all the prison doors flew open and everyone's chains came loose. And the jailer, who had confidently gone to sleep, trusting in what the gate he had closed and the stocks he'd put their feet in, the jailer woke up. And when he saw the prison doors open, he drew his sword and was about to kill himself because he thought the prisoners had escaped. But Paul shouted, wait, don't harm yourself. We're actually all right here. Remember, this is a life or death job for this jailer. If he fails at this job, he's probably not trusted again. He probably loses his income. He probably loses his ability to provide for his family. It is a big deal for him. Paul says, wait, but just think about this. How cool is it that God rescues them like that. Let's give God a little credit in the moment, right? That's miraculous. That's amazing. That's like defy my natural understanding, right? I mean, come on, how many of us would just be grateful today if God would do something that would defy our understanding to get us out of what we're in? Or I mean, right? I mean, the rest of you are lying or don't know what you need, right? Yeah, I mean, we'd be great, right? I mean, how many of us just wish that God would shake the foundations of the world and kind of balance and right all the nations again? How many of you wish God would just shake something and all of a sudden everybody would get along again and people would be called, right? I mean, of course, right? I mean, who wouldn't want that? It's remarkable and amazing, and God should get all sorts of credit, and we should anticipate all sorts of those kinds of things. That's what God does. That's what God does. But you got to see something here for a second, friends. And you got to hear me. This is going to toss some of you just for a minute. Hang in. God's primary intent was not the release of those prisoners. Gates open up, chains drop off, prisoners can walk out, jailer was sleeping. I mean, isn't that what we're after? Isn't that what Paul and Silas are after? Just get us out of here? The primary intent isn't that. The primary intent isn't the release of Paul and Silas. And we know it in part because, did you notice what they didn't even go anywhere at first. When they could have run, they're like, oh, wait, we're right here. We're still here. Same spot we were a minute ago. We're still here. We see the gates open. We see the chains falling off our ankles. We're still here. The primary intent was not the release of the prisoners. See, God encounters, and when we worship God, and even in our agony or disappointment, and we experience these God encounters, there's always collateral encounters. There's always this ripple effect that God's up to that's just a little bigger than what we might initially see. Let's look at what happens next. Verse 30. So the jailer calls for the lights. He rushes in. He falls trembling before Paul and Silas. And then he brings them out because they didn't run out themselves, even though they could have. And he asked, guys, I heard, you talking about Jesus on the street. I know that's part of the reason that you're in here. I heard you singing. Even I've seen your wounds, and I was the one that put those stocks in you to make you even more uncomfortable. And yet I've heard who you're singing to and what you're singing about, and there is something different. I mean, what do I have to do to be saved? What do I have to do to really live and really come alive? You see, I was banking on this job, and the thing that I thought was most secure for me, and the thing that I thought I could do best, and the thing that I thought I could count on to be my source of strength and what would provide for me, clearly that's like in a precarious situation right now. We've just had a problem at the prison. I need to live for something bigger. I want to live for something more. You guys are clearly experiencing something in the depth of your life where you're really living. How do I really live? What a great question, huh? And you might even be asking that question today, like, man, how do I really live? I've tried so many things, and it feels they can be good for a while, even sometimes for years, but then something breaks and something seems fragile again, and I can't really count on it, or I get disappointed, or that person lets me down, or I don't have the strength to overcome it on my own. How do I really live? How do I really live the way that Jesus intended me to live? How do I really live with a life that overflows even when my circumstances are crumbling? How do I really live with purpose and significance? Maybe that's the question you're asking, just like the jailer was. And the answer is the same for us as it was for the jailer. Look at how Paul and Silas respond to him. Verse 31, they just very simply say back to him, just believe. He uses a word that we often hear believe in our context. We think just believe in your head that Jesus is who he says he is. But they're using a word that describes like whole life, like entrust your whole life. Like let Jesus literally carry your life. Like put all of your weight on him. Believe and trust your whole life to the Lord Jesus, to Jesus as your leader, as your master, as your guide. And you will be saved. You will be made one with him. Just believe that he actually wants to do that. And at the end of the day, you and your whole household would probably do that. And then they just keep speaking the word of Jesus to him and to all the others in the house. Do you begin to see it now? The primary intent, God's primary intent was not to release the prisoners. God's primary intent was the salvation of the jailer. God's primary intent was the salvation of the jailer. It's always salvation first. God's kingdom multiplies in its very DNA. It's always trying to reach the next person. Why? Because God created all of humanity to be with them. The primary intent is not to release the prisoner. That's an intent, and that's significant, and it matters. And listen, please hear me. Today, whatever holds you back or keeps you stuck, God would love to release you from that. No question about it. And his primary intent is at the very same time to let you or people around you experience the gift of his salvation. Primary intent is the salvation of the jailer. Because that's like the earth shaking, like the whole earthquake thing, and like gates opening and chains falling and everything else. That's miraculous. Yeah, I mean, that's incredible, right? That's not even the greatest miracle in the story, right? I mean, like the ground shaking, that's cool, but that's not even the best thing in the story. I love the way Billy Graham says it, right? A transformed life is the greatest miracle there is. You know what the greatest miracle is? It's not that earthquake. It's not rock shaking. It's not chains opening. A transformed life is the greatest of all the miracles. You just can't beat a transformed life. And that's what salvation is. Salvation is a transformed life, and it's the beginning of an ongoing transformation. Salvation is an encounter with Jesus that begins a life of encounters with Jesus. This jailer, it's one encounter that opens up a life of encounters for him and his whole family. And today, maybe you feel like the jailer a little bit. Maybe you're at the place where you're saying, what do I have to do to really live? And I'm just going to tell you straight up, hear what they didn't say. They didn't say, make sure you get to the church on this Sunday, make sure you do this, make sure you do that, make sure you check this box, make sure you sign this thing. They said, man, just put your whole life in the hands of Jesus. That's where it's at. He's the answer. You just put your whole life in the hands of Jesus. I just want to invite you to do that today. To put your life in the hands of Jesus, to say, I want to really live, and Jesus is the way to do that. In order to do it, I just want to lead you in the most simple prayer ever, and it's not magic. I don't have it memorized, but I just want to lead you here in the room and watching from home, or maybe you're joining from vacation, wherever it is, right? Just want to lead you in the most simple prayer that says, Jesus, here I am. I want to entrust my life. I want to really live. So you should bow your heads, close your eyes with me. Even those of you joining online, just wherever you're at, just go ahead and bow your head, close your eyes. Maybe you're by yourself. Maybe you're with 5 or 6 or 7 people. Just kind of honor yourself, Jesus, and the people around you in this moment. I just want to lead you in this very simple prayer. And again, maybe just from the very depths of your heart, you'll just let this be your prayer. Let these or words like these be the cry of your heart. I mean, just literally, it could just be something as simple as, Jesus, I want to live. And so I'm coming to you. And I place my life in your hands. I trust in your forgiveness. I trust in your grace. I trust in your strength. I trust in your love for me. So I give you my life as an expression of that trust, and as my way of saying I love you back. Thanks for hearing the prayer of my heart. Thanks for letting me experience the gift of your salvation. Jesus, I thank you that you're that available to us, that you're that ready, that you're that close, and that you're that eager. Thanks for it. So grateful for it. I'm grateful that your primary intent is to get you and I, to get us reconciled with you. I agree with Billy Graham. That's the greatest miracle there is when our lives start changing with you. Thanks for it. Thanks for it. I just want to invite you wherever you're at, still prayerfully, just everywhere you're at, go ahead and look back up at me, online, here in the room. I want to invite every single person who has one with them or near them to grab your phone. Every single person, every one of you. I don't care how long you've followed Jesus or how resistant you are, just every single person. Or if you don't have a phone because your mom made you leave yours in the car, then just look on real close, okay? Take your phone. Every single person, take your phone. And I just want us to respond together to this, okay? And I promise there's a response for everybody, okay? Maybe today, I want to just invite you to text this number. We're going to put a number on the screen, and I want to invite you to text this number. And maybe if you just say, hey, I'm already a follower of Jesus, I want you to just text the letter A. Say, why am I doing that? Because we're all going to do it together. We're just all going to respond together. It'll make it easier on all of us if we're all responding together. So you just say, hey, I'm already a follower of Jesus. Just text the letter S if you say, no, today I'm surrendering my life to him for the first time. Today, I'm with the jailer. I'm going to put my trust in Jesus. Just text an S. Just text the S in. We're not going to overwhelm you. We're not going to try and sell you anything, but we would love to get some resources in your hands. We'd love to have an entry conversation to just help begin this relationship with Jesus. But maybe you just be honest enough to say, nope, and not today. And maybe when you type in, you're in your mind saying never. Like, that's fine. I commend your honesty. I 100% celebrate your honesty. There's no judgment, no condemnation in it. We'd love it if you were bold enough to be that honest. So just text one of those to that number. And again, we're all kind of processes and responding that together. And then after today, don't ever bring your phone in here. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. The story keeps going. Let me just read you one more part of the story. It's really cool. Okay, here's what happens. Here's what happens next. Verse 33, right after they hear about Jesus and they surrender their lives to Jesus. Verse 33, at that hour of the night, the jailer took Paul and Silas and he washed their wounds. He washed their wounds. And then immediately, all his household was baptized. All of his household baptized. This jailer and his household, all being immersed somewhere, wherever they could find water in their house. They're all being immersed into the water. And when they go into the water, it's this symbol of, man, I'm dying with Jesus to my sin and my selfish and my own way of living. And when they're pulled back up out of the water by Paul or Silas or whoever was doing it, it's this reminder, this symbol of being raised to new life, to saying, I'm really going to live, but I live with Jesus. It's Jesus who I live. I get to experience his resurrection power. That's the symbolism, but the power of baptism. It wasn't his salvation. It's not our salvation. But man, what a great outward symbol of saying, man, I am with Jesus and he's with me. I've died with him and I rise with him.